Welcome to the March 23rd meeting of the Penfield Board of Education. This meeting is called back to order at 6:41. Please rise and the clerk will lead us in the pledge.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
It is recommended that the board approve the March 23rd, 2021 agenda as submitted. So may I have a motion and a second to approve the March 23rd agenda as submitted?
So moved. Second.
Any questions or comments? All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. And may I have it would be recommended that we approve, the board approves, approves the following consent agenda, which includes the approval of the minutes from March 9th, 2021 as submitted, the acceptance of the recommendation from the Committee of Special Education, the acceptance of recommendations from the Committee on Preschool Special Education, the acceptance of recommendations from the superintendent for personnel changes, a request to approve the recommended bidder, Bison Elevator Service, per Penfield CSD RFP 21-4, Bay Trail Elevator Modernization for elevators dated 3/15/21, and a request to approve the recommended bidders for School Specialty Supply, WB Mason, National Art and School Supplies, Pyramid School Products, Blick Art Material, Cascade School Supplies, Medco Supply, Kurt Brothers, Retro Ceramics, Quill S&S Worldwide, per Monroe to Orleans Bosse's cooperative bid for art supplies for the period of 4/1/21 through 3/31/22, and the approval for the request to dispose of unserviceable textbooks. So may I have a motion and a second?
So moved. Second.
Any questions or comments? All those in favor? Any opposed? The motion carries. So it's recommended that the treasurer's report, including the cash report, general fund cash report, general fund revenue status report, general fund budget status report, school lunch fund cash report, and school lunch fund revenue and expense budget report for the month ending January 31st, 2021 be approved.
So moved. Second.
Any questions or comments? All those in favor? Any opposed? All right, motion carries. There are no special reports today, which brings us right up to the student representatives report. Abby Jackman.
Hello everybody, It
Hi,
is
Abby.
that time again. To start things off, at Penfield High School, the music department will be hosting the annual spring concert, which will include both virtual and in-person student performances. And both the girls basketball team and the boys ice hockey team won sectional titles. Good job, guys. At Scribner, the Girls on the Run program begins April 5th and ends with a celebratory 5K run on the weekend of June 5th through the 6th. At Cobbles, students participated in a Music in Our Schools Month Spirit Week, and the days of the Spirit Week circulated around music themes, some being Blues Day, Country Day, and Rock and Roll Day, etc. At Indian Landing, students created a kindness chain where any observed acts of kindness were written down on a chain link, and the chain was almost 3 full classrooms in length, and I think that's quite remarkable.
Wow.
How solely in one school in the Penfield district there was that much kindness observed. And also at Indian Landing, kindergarten students had an outdoor picnic with their favorite stuffed animal to enjoy the recent nice weather we've been having. At Harris Hill, the Harris Hill PTA will be hosting their 2nd annual bingo night on April 9th. And lastly, for district-wide news, March 17th was St. Patrick's Day. The para supply drop-off took place on March 20th at Cobbles and Harris Hill, And all schools in the Penfield District encourage their students and the students' families to participate. And for anyone who doesn't know, PARA stands for the Penfield Anti-Racist Alliance. And I am particularly excited for this. Alternating Wednesday instruction begins tomorrow for Cohort B, so I'll see you all tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, Abby. Board, any questions for Abby? Great, thank you.
Thanks, Abby.
Okay, so now we're at visitor speaking time. This is the designated time for district residents to bring their comments to the board. The board encourages residents to share their opinions, voice concerns, and offer suggestions in a constructive atmosphere. Matters involving particular individuals or specifics in negotiations are not permitted during public session and should be addressed privately with the board, president, or superintendent. Comments brought to the board will be taken under consideration. However, this is not a time when the board can answer questions or engage in dialogue. A request to speak form must be filled out prior to the start of the meeting and given to the district clerk. Speakers are expected to identify themselves with their name and address before presenting and limit their comments to 5 minutes or less. The board president reserves the right to limit total time of visitor speaking time based on the length of the agenda, and written communications are also encouraged. So we do have a speaker tonight, Sean O'Brien. Welcome, Mr. O'Brien. Please state your name and address.
My name is Sean O'Brien at 1200s Drive. Once again, I want to thank you for providing me this opportunity to speak. I do not say this lightly and without consideration, but it appears that this administration is more interested in finding reasons to keep our kids out of school 5 days a week than in. In the past 2 board meetings, I did not hear any board members offer solutions or share ideas on how to reopen. Instead, we got worst-case scenarios of additional COVID waves and new variants. We even had a board member express more concern about a rooftop garden. How is this carrying out the will of the people, as it states in your bylaws? The will of the people, as evidenced by the district survey, clearly shows that the majority want their kids back in school 5 days a week. This should be encouraging until you read more. Apparently, the students were also polled. How is this helpful? Are you really asking teenagers if they want more school? Did you also ask them if they wanted more homework? Did you ask them if they wanted to take more tests? What is the purpose of this other than to create more roadblocks and division? I hear the word equity a lot. Last time I spoke, I offered a solution to stagger certain grades back into school. We know the kindergarten rooms have had the capacity, yet the administration has not responded to this. I'm left to assume that in the name of equity, all students go back or none do. Which is interesting because there was a survey for kids and my son didn't get one. He also has to use a machine for the majority of his education that he doesn't know how to use because he's still learning letters and numbers. The district failed to incorporate much of the science, health, and social studies curriculum, and as a result, they just omitted it. Is this replacement of education as equitable for him as it is for older students? Further on down the email, we have the big if. If the New York State Department of Health aligns with CDC guidance and we are able to fully reopen. Am I to assume we are now just waiting on the New York State Department of Health to align with the CDC guidance, then you will fully reopen? Or are these additional roadblocks, as indicated by the and in the same sentence? It is odd considering we already know that these are not necessary. We know this because other schools are going 5 days a week in our own county. We know that our county can change its own guidelines as evidenced by Onondaga County. Has anyone on the board reached out to the health commissioner, Inda Gupta from Onondaga, and reviewed the county's policy proposal published March 16th with research published even earlier on March 4th? Tom said in his last board meeting that at the end of the day, what I know the board is committed to and the district is that we aren't going to wait. I'm not sure what this is in reference to considering you are waiting. Your recent email is evidence of this. You're waiting on the Department of Health. This is what is frustrating with this administration and has parents frustrated. You are playing the blame game and coming up with excuses not to reopen. Sure, there are issues that need to be addressed and risks that need to be mitigated. But how can any of us help with a solution if you keep just pointing fingers at moving targets and the only items discussed are roadblocks? This situation makes me feel cynical. However, I am not without hope. I hope 5 days a week comes back. I hope there continues to be a virtual option. I hope we get our education back. But if this experience provides me anything, it is that my hope in our leadership to do the right thing and carry out the will of the people has been misplaced. I hope that leadership proves me wrong.
All right, thank you, Mr. O'Brien. Next, I'll turn it over to Dr. Putnam for student and staff honors and superintendent update.
Thank you. So this evening we do have some student and staff honors, and Abby did mention some, but I have pictures. And then I do have a couple updates around COVID, our reopening plans, and some survey data. And then I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Driffill, who will talk through our budget development updates as we move towards the end of the year. And then Mr. Peiffer is going to talk about the New York State assessments, 3 through 8 regions, what we know as of today, and the impact on our students. So congratulations, first of all, to 2 incredible teams, our PHS varsity girls basketball team and our PHS ice hockey team on winning their sectional titles. A huge kudos to both teams. Hockey brought home the sectional title for the first time in Penfield's history. Very exciting, and they worked hard and came home victorious. Unfortunately, because of COVID, there is no states, but I think that both teams would have gone on to be state title champions. That's what I'm going to continue to tell myself, so congratulations to our teams. Wrestling honors, again, another great team. Congratulations to our entire high school wrestling team on placing second at sectionals, and specifically to Kieran McGee, Kyle Spalding, and Cooper Krotman on winning their individual weight classes. And congratulations to them. A lot of hard work goes into that. I know for all 3 of those teams, excited to see a season this year, and I was happy to see that take place. So just some updates around the COVID guidance. So where are we right now with the return to 5 days of in-person instruction? Things really started to shift with the introduction of high-risk sports that we just talked about, and we saw some success. There were one of the pieces that the state continues to talk about with why they allowed high-risk sports to take place is because you could quickly contact trace. Use wrestling for an example. If a student is wrestling another student, you know immediately that they have not been 6 feet apart and they have not been wearing masks for that match, and therefore very easy for the Monroe County Department of Health to contact trace and put people on quarantine if necessary. And so that actually is a positive that works in our favor. So the CDC has issued updated guidance on a return to in-person instruction. This was really exciting. We talked a little bit about it last meeting. Since then, they've continued to update their guidance. Lots of conversation. New York State Department of Health came out and said that they were going to be putting something out, that they were going to be issuing a statement. They have not done so. So the most significant change in CDC language is the social distancing between students. It's detailed. The CDC guidance is online. Anybody can go and look at it. It's not clear and cut and dry that it's a move from 6 feet to 3 feet, but in a lot of areas it is a move to 3 feet distancing as opposed to 6 for students, not for adults. So all throughout the CDC guidelines, the 6 foot distance is still required or recommended for between adults and students, but students can be sitting closer together. Since August, we've talked about using science and data to support our decisions around COVID. And so the CDC updates is the most up-to-date science and data. They utilized a study that got a lot of media press from Massachusetts that they found no distinguished difference between 6 foot and 3 foot for the spread of COVID in classroom settings with students, and that's been very helpful. I believe the state of California picked up and approved the CDC guidance for their schools, and it does not recommend barriers. That was very interesting. CDC's updated guidance also talks about not recommending barriers, as it does not actually stop COVID. And then the other great news from CDC is the relaxation of recommendations tied to community transition rates. They still do tie how much you can reopen at what grade level to what is the transmission rate in your community. And while ours is still right now in the CDC red zone, we're getting close to moving below that. And that's really, again, all we can say is please in our community is whatever you can do outside of school is wearing those masks and doing everything we can to mitigate our COVID risk. So New York State Department of Health is where my frustration continues to be, and more so ever, is that they have been silent on an update around the CDC release guidance. So we had a meeting today with Monroe County Department of Health, thinking they typically have an in with New York State. They have heard nothing. There's been no shift. I don't think I'm telling the board or the community thing that I think Albany has some other issues they're trying to deal with our governor currently, and maybe the New York State Department of Health is not on top of the game to update the guidance. We are aware that there are people resigning from the New York State Department of Health. I think they're working with less people. I think they're trying to work through everything. But at the end of the day, that CDC guidance is very, very promising. And so as we wait for the New York State Department of Health to update their guidance, which we think there will, but I want to talk through this. What are we going to do while we're continuing to wait for that guidance? We're going to advocate, which we have been doing and continue to do so through our superintendent group, through Monroe County School Boards Association, and individually to have the governor and the New York State Department of Health adopt the CDC guidance. We're going to continue to prepare for a return to 5 days of in-person instruction. This includes moving all of our furniture that we moved out of classrooms for space back into classrooms, preparing our facilities, getting our bathrooms back online, getting our bubblers and our water fountains and sinks back online that were shut down due to social distancing. We've been working with determining our transportation needs, met with transportation today, looking through the survey that we'll talk about in a minute for students, families that said they could drive for the last 10 weeks of school. And also preparing our building space to accommodate more students. One of the issues we're dealing with right now with the CDC guidance is it doesn't change distancing in the cafeteria, and so that's still 6 feet. And we're working through, that's a big space. If you double the number of students and try to do it at 6 feet, it's impossible, but the weather's getting nice and we're really starting to look outside the box because of that weather. It's going to be very helpful for us. So we're updating our current reopening documents based on that CDC guidance. So this is taking a bit of a risk, but also what we think is best because we continue to say we're using the science and the CDC is using the most updated science now, and that we are revising and starting to revise our reopening documents. Those were the documents we had to submit to New York State in July and that we had to post on our webpage. So we're going through those and trying to use the CDC guidance as our new framework as opposed to the New York State Department of Health guidance. And we're using stakeholder survey data to inform many of these decisions. So this is going to be tough to read, so I apologize, but I'll read it off, and the board has it on their screen. But the stakeholder survey results were interesting. So we asked some questions around people's comfort to return to school 5 days a week. And we asked our 3 major stakeholder groups. So with parents and guardians through Infinite Campus, so we had about an 85% response rate. So 15% of parents did not respond, but 85 is a pretty extraordinarily high number when we take a look at data results. The comfort level for returning 5 days a week is 83% of those that responded. And then comfort level, if teachers and schedules have to change, does go down a bit to 67%. Faculty and staff, we had about a 60% response rate. And this isn't just teachers, so this is all staff that we surveyed. And so from that, we've got a 74% people are saying they're comfortable coming back 5 days a week. The note in here was if it's based on the New York State Department of Health, we're currently using the CDC because New York State Department of Health hasn't changed. Similar to parents, the comfort level does change if students have to get new schedules. We did send an email to all students currently enrolled in Penfield, kindergarten through 12th grade, to their district email. We know that our youngest kids probably don't check their email, so we referenced this in our email to parents about talking to their child about checking their school email. From that, we did get survey, but I pulled out and only looked at 6 through 12 just because we only had about 100 students, K through 5, or a little less than that, fill out the survey. So looking at secondary students, 6th grade through 12th grade, the response rate was about 61%. Their comfort level is 67% returning 5 days a week, and then comfort level, if they all have to get new schedules or if they had new schedule, does fall to 43%. So The reality is that all stakeholders do play a role in these decisions. One stakeholder doesn't outweigh the other, because at the end of the day, we do have to follow the guidance. That is the law, that is the rule, and that's why we're continuing to forge ahead based on this data that all of our groups, all of our stakeholder groups are comfortable, majority of moving forward with returning. So the transportation survey is also interesting. So as a total, if we look at the total that we have, we put out in terms of how many students would still need a bus if we came back for the last 10 weeks, 5 days a week. And so just as I look at the full number, is that as a district, 64% of our students who currently get a bus would need a bus still. So about 36% of our students would be able to get a ride, drive themselves if they're in high school, or carpool, but not need Penfield School District transportation. I do want to note in this survey is it is through Infinite Campus, which is the most consistent way and accurate way that we can get, because every student has a survey tied to them, as opposed to like a Microsoft form where people can type it in and we don't know if they're actually in Penfield or anywhere. So this is very accurate, but it does fall into, trying to get as many people to respond. So our response rate, I don't have it on here, but it was pretty high for the transportation survey. But the number of students totally in our district who would need a bus, who get assigned a bus, is about 4,000 students. About 2,500 would still need a bus, and that's about 64%. I do want to note, though, that if you didn't respond to the survey and you would typically get a bus, we counted you as needing a bus. We're going to err on the side of caution and do that. So, the percent who actually needs a bus could be a little bit lower. But if you don't fill out the survey, even after our reminders, we're going to count you as needing a bus, because I'd rather have a bus there and nobody to pick up versus somebody get picked up and we didn't route a bus to their house. So what's interesting with, I think, with the transportation is that, all of this, is that most stakeholders are comfortable with the return to 5 days in person. If the CDC or New York State Department of Health, perhaps, guidance is followed. Students did say, and we've heard from families on both sides of this conversation, that as long as that option of attending 100% virtual is still in place, so our continued plans for return 5 days continues to have a virtual component. So people who are not comfortable for health will have that ability to stay in the virtual program or shift into the virtual program. And then obviously, safety of all stakeholders remains a priority. And so typically we follow the New York State Department of Health and Monroe County Department of Health guidance, so we can make sure that we're following the medical experts in this. And then now that the New York State Department of Health has not shared anything, has not provided an update, and has gone radio silent, we are pushing forward with looking at that CDC guidance. And when I say we, it's not just Penfield, but Monroe County schools and across the state are really starting to put more and more pressure on the New York State Department of Health. So the comfort level does decrease in all three groups, all three stakeholder groups, if students and teachers have to change. So if, part of that is having the same teacher. I want to be fair and honest, though, that if you're currently a 100% virtual kid, and more of this is going to come out, I'll explain in a minute, but if you're currently in the 100% virtual class and you come back into the school 5 days a week, you are probably getting new teachers. That's the reality. And if you are currently in hybrid and decide you don't want to come back 5 days a week, you want to go 100% virtual, you are probably getting new teachers. But if you stay within your program and you stay either in person or virtual, it's more likely that there wouldn't be a teacher change. And I can't make a promise 100% for everybody, but that's right now what we continue to build upon. So the transportation survey data was interesting. So while 36% of our students did say, or their parents and guardians said, that they could transport to school without using buses, that 36% was spread out proportionally across the district. So we were hopeful that there might be pockets in the community where more people didn't need the bus than others, so we could reroute buses and double up buses and maybe take 2 neighborhoods, which usually was 2 buses, and condense it down to 1 bus, saving us time, saving us a driver, and making it more efficient. Unfortunately, that isn't the case because it was really spread out across the way. However, it's still really helpful data because transportation is using that data to revise the bus routes and be able to determine how many students are going to be on those buses. So we may might be planful to have 50 students on that bus, but based on the survey data, we know it's only going to be 30. So our buses will have more students on them if we're able to come back 5 days. We're not going to be able to maintain the one student every seat. It's going to be the only way to do it, and CDC does allow this with language around whenever possible. So one of the things we're looking at right now and building through with the CDC guidance is windows on all the buses are open. That's where I talk about the weather can be helpful for us now. So keeping windows open all through the winter might be tough, but the weather is starting to change, and having that airflow on the buses, masking 100% on the buses, siblings sitting together whenever possible. But our buses will have more students on them than they are now. So the next steps here as we continue to look for a return to 5 days of in-person instruction. We are, as a district, are continuing to use the CDC guidance as the framework for a return to 5 days. All through the beginning of the year, we used the New York State Department of Health and Monroe County Department of Health as our guidance framework. Since we've heard nothing from the New York State Department of Health, we are going to continue to move forward with the CDC guidance and prepare based on that guidance. We're going to need to, and this is when I say short term, this is this week prior to break, finalize descriptions of what each instructional model would look like. If on April 19th, and that is our goal, that we can open back full time for people 5 days a week, we're only going to be offering 2 programs, 5 days a week in person or 100% virtual. There would be no hybrid version. And so we're using the surveys we're using the survey data we just shared to determine which model each student is selecting and balance the schedules based on the survey. So our survey to parents asked, what would you pick? Would you want to be 100% virtual, or would you rather stay 100% in person? And it really was a comfort level survey, because obviously parents want and deserve a little bit more information before they make a decision. We found from the survey that there are some families who are gung-ho and are ready to come back regardless of what it looks like, others who are more tentative, and then on the other side, people who regardless are going to stay virtual or move to virtual. So our goal by Wednesday, Thursday, tomorrow evening, Thursday evening, is to get out to the parents and to the students what, as a framework, will 100% in-person look like and what will 100% virtual look like. So people can make a decision, and we really need that data after break. So we'll be looking at Tuesday after break as our closing. If we don't hear from people on that survey, we are going to keep them in the current what they're in. So if they're in hybrid and they don't respond to the survey, their child will be scheduled into 5 days a week. And if they are currently virtual and we don't hear back, we'll keep them in virtual. So after break, we are bringing our reopening advisory committees together. A date will come out Friday or early next week. We're going to bring all 4 groups together to review where we're at with the plan for reopening that would have to get resubmitted. The reopening advisory committees, quite honestly, took a little bit of a backseat when the CDC and First Monroe County Department of Health said we're going to be able to pull this off sooner rather than later. And so we've got our teams ready to go, and an email will be coming out later this week to the parents who were selected, and an email to the folks who weren't, because we want to keep those, the 250 parents and guardians who are interested in being part of this, we want to obviously keep them up to date along with our entire community. So the long-term steps is really between now and April 19th. Is to continue to push New York State Department of Health to update the guidance based on science and CDC. That would be a home run. If the New York State Department of Health could come out and say, we support the CDC guidance, that is a pure green light for all districts to submit plans and know that they'd be approved because they're going to be tied to the CDC guidance. At the same time, while we're advocating and pushing, we're going to be finalizing our classrooms and facilities to take more students into them using 3 feet as the distance. So less than 6, more than 3 feet. So in some classrooms, it might be 4 feet apart. but we want to be fair and say that we're using 3 feet distance in the classroom between students as our guide. And then continue to finalize the reopening documents. They would have to be submitted to the SED portal. We've talked about this at the board meeting before, but we learned today that there is no way to resubmit those reopening plans on the portal. There's no easy way. There's not a document that you can just fill out like we did in July and hit submit. The only way to submit the reopening documents is to actually resubmit our old documents. So we've got to contact SED, we have the contact, let them know we need them to reopen the portal, and then go in and make changes based on our plans, and then resubmit. So there is a way to do it, it's just not as easy as everybody had hoped. And then monitor regional COVID transmission rates. So I go back to that CDC guidance. I encourage people to go and read the CDC guidance. It's pretty clear that a lot of this is easier for K-5. So the K-5 3-foot distancing is pretty clear, and they just recommend as your community transmission rate goes up to the red zone, which is where we're teetering on right now, that you cohort at the elementary. We already cohort at the elementary pretty easily because we teach kindergarten, and the kindergarten kids are all together, and then the kindergarten kids in that one class all go to music together, so they're all together. Middle school and high school, we don't traditionally cohort. And so if you're in the red zone, they really try to keep you at 6 feet distancing at the secondary level. However, we've been looking at what cohorting means. And so if it's tied back to contact tracing, our master schedules at Bay Trail and the high school allow for contact tracing with a couple of little tweaks. If we can say, I'll use high school, if we can use high school and say, in every class you're in, you have an assigned seat, and you sit in the same seat every class. And at lunch, you sit with the same group every day. And gosh forbid, student A tests positive for COVID, we can pull the master schedule and the seating charts from all the classes and lunch and say that I know student A was less than 6 feet from these 4 students in this class, these 4 students in this class, these 2 students in this class, and we can do contact tracing really quickly, which we believe fits the model of being able to cohort. And so that's what we're digging into right now. Since the CDC guidance is new, and because New York State Department of Health hasn't put anything out defining what the cohort is, we do believe that would fit the letter of the spirit of the law around COVID in the CDC. So that's just one example of what we're digging into now. So just as a reminder, this week we're digging into that CDC framework even further. We're finalizing descriptions to the 2 models that we can support. We'll be putting out a survey to families so we know which student is going to be in person and which is virtual. And we are working to finalize transportation, and then we'll get an email out. I'm really hoping Friday. At the latest, it would be Monday for the week after break on inviting people to a virtual, we'll do it virtual so we can get as many people in there to the reopening advisory committee to review what we have in place with our plan. And then that longer term is to continue to use the New York State Department of Health, push them to change, continue to use the CDC, finalize everything we need. All of our, for example, all of our furniture is not back into the classroom yet. We still are moving that in. We're using weekends and second shift to get furniture moved back in. And that's one of the things we have to do. So we're not waiting until the New York State Department of Health updates the guidance, although we still think they will, because if we wait for that, then it's going to take 4 weeks to move furniture, it's going to take a week to get survey data from families, it's going to take a week to get our plan ready to submit, and by then I think we're opening in September. So our goal now is to continue moving forward, but I want to be clear with the board and clear with the community. We're using the CDC guidance as our framework because New York State Department of Health has not provided any updates regardless of how hard we push. School boards push, the community pushes, and superintendents push. And, I don't talk politics, but I do think the governor has some other things on his plate right now, and this is not a priority. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but we have all been shouting for updated guidance, And when the CDC nationally comes out with very clear guidance focused on the new study from Massachusetts and other documentation of what they learned, we know that COVID is ever changing. We knew that we weren't going to be experts of it in a month, but we do lean on those medical experts to give us what they think we should do. And I will give that one piece when we talk about the CDC's recommendation of not using barriers is very interesting, because that is what our Monroe County Director of Health continued to say, is that they don't stop COVID. And so there was no research, there was no science. Now there is. So the barriers don't work to stop COVID. We didn't use them. Most in Monroe County did not use them. And as we look now, the CDC guidance says 3 feet at K5 without the use of barriers. That's very, very hopeful. We can do this. Just frustrating from our end that New York State Department of Health hasn't shifted. So we're going to keep moving forward. We'll continue to update the community. I would really just, if you're watching now, the biggest piece is going to be that survey of selecting. That's going to be huge for us to make a determination of class size and shifting. But if you look at 3 feet distancing, it's going to look more like a traditional school year. So class size will be at the secondary level around 24, 25. Our cafeteria will have the typical number of kids in it, but we're talking about shortening lunch periods and getting kids outside for a little recess at the high school level. So we can be outside, we can be a little bit more spread out, and also using like the East Gym at the high school on those rainy, or it is March, so it could still snow days. But, so we're going to continue working through this, and we'll know more right when we get back from break, and then we'll keep the community. But our focus and my real strong hope, I've said it publicly and in our letters, is April 19th is the date we're shooting for. It's the first day of fourth quarter at the high school. Students will have grades closed out of third quarter and coming back for fourth quarter for those who are comfortable and ready to come back 5 days a week. That is my hope, and we are continue to build for that so we can hopefully move forward with it. I want to be honest and fair, is that the transmission rate is what worries all of us, I think. I think that, we're still in the red zone. We were 83 new cases yesterday, I believe. But I just worry, and as we've talked about a long time, is the sort of that COVID precaution fatigue. The sun's out, it's nice outside, our kids are playing club sports, they're playing team sports, they want to get outside, and we're kind of, as a community and a nation, maybe throwing care to the wind, and that worries me. So the more we can do to get that community transmission down, that only helps us. I can't control that. I can't control what anybody does outside in the community, but the lower that number is, the better it looks for schools to really stand behind why we need the DOH to pick up the CDC guidance. That's all I have for this evening, unless there's any questions.
There might be. Board members, any questions for Dr. Putnam? Catherine?
Okay, so you are preparing to open based on the CDC guidelines, but the clarification I need is that we still cannot open until New York State says we can, or that they,
Yeah.
well, maybe I should just leave the question at that. I was going to give you an opposite scenario there, but
No, so this is where it's tricky, but we're going to keep moving forward with preparing to reopen. So the way it's worked all summer is the New York State Department of Health is the guidance that we follow.
Yeah.
And then we're supposed to go to our local Department of Health for explanations,
Yeah.
support, things like that.
Clarifications.
The only group that can approve our plan or say you're following it correctly is the New York State Department of Health and the New York State Education Department. The local Department of Health never approved it, but
Right.
they give us the guidance from their medical expert
Right.
side of things. So that is going to be a big question. We believe that as of today, looking at, talking to other superintendents, looking at what we can do, is our frustration level, I'll speak specifically for me, my frustration level around the fact that the CDC guidance has the support of medical experts around the country and the region, and New York State Department of Health hasn't acted on it, is very frustrating.
Yeah.
So when we say that we are going to follow the data and the science of COVID to make safe decisions for all stakeholders, right? Even though that didn't make everybody happy, but we could say we're following the safety of the data we know. The CDC data is giving us a lot more wiggle room to open back more traditionally. It's not perfect, and that's why I'd be really clear. It's not like, oh, just replace 6 with 3 everywhere 3 feet or 6 feet is listed and you got it. It's much more complicated, but it gives us a much larger window to get through to help us out to reopen. So we are going to move forward with this, our plans. We're going to have to resubmit our plans to the state.
Right.
But to be fair, when we submitted our plans, the state doesn't have a whole lot of people who are going to say yay or nay. But if we're following the CDC guidance, we think we'll get the okay to move forward.
Okay.
I guess to be fair and transparent, is it's possible New York State could send something back and say, you do not have our permission to reopen.
Yeah.
And now it's a conversation that involves lawyers on who has the right to say
Yeah.
yes or no.
Okay. All
That's a
right.
complicated answer, but does that help?
Yes, that helps. And then just to your point about transmission rates, I do notice that it's ticking up it's incrementally, but it is.
Yep.
Then I did see on the news today, just for anyone who's interested, about that herd immunity conversation, that that's going to require so many people getting vaccinated, and a great many people do not want to be vaccinated. So I think that's a concern of a lot of people, of the uptick and then coming down and then going up again and coming down, because so many people don't want to get vaccinated, and then the variants are going around.
I think I'm not a real doctor, I just have that education title, but in terms of medical science, all I can tell you is what we hear from the medical experts we work with, is that, there is not this dream of COVID, of us waking up and saying, oh, COVID's over, right? I mean, it's going to be here, so it's really working through using the science to say, how do we navigate a world where COVID is still in existence?
Yeah.
So does it become like the flu, where there's going to be a booster every year that people will have to take? And that's a real possibility. Does it mean that we're studying the risk factors and determining that the younger the child, the less likely they are to have life complicating skills? I think with everything, it's not zero, right? We're not going to have this piece where I can say there will be no risk, but the CDC language is all about mitigating risk and what else we're doing. So masking isn't going anywhere. It's proper masking, it's hand washing, it's cleaning our desks, it's all the hand sanitizer and everything else that we're putting into place to make sure we're keeping students and staff, as safe as we possibly can as we move to hopefully get more students back into the buildings.
Okay. Now, Mark, I do have one more question. Do you want to circle back?
Yeah,
Please.
Lisa,
Yes,
let's
thank
go to
you.
Lisa.
Sorry. Thank you. I think that was one of my questions about, would we submit anyway, but I have another concern about if the Department of Health is radio silent, what are we doing next year?
Yeah.
We're focusing now about opening this year, which I think is important, but I'm concerned that, are we going to get all this crazy guidance in July again and be in the same boat as we were last year, or do you have thoughts, or?
I have lots of thoughts. But I'll tell you this, is that when we announced that we are going to be having opening advisory committees, the focus for those committees was September, right? So it's still going to be September. So when we roll those committees out, our goal will be that they will work with us, parents, guardians, students at the secondary level, teachers, staff, administrators, and board members to work through when that guidance comes. Because at some point they're going to change guidance, and at some point they're going to change it again this summer. And there's lots of questions around what the guidance looks like, and are we required to have 100% virtual model for September. And if we are, then we definitely want that 100% virtual model committee to also look through our plans and help us design them to make sure that they are the most effective and best use of our staff. So the answer would be for the September my statement is, I really hope so. I mean, they if you remember everything we've done, and you guys have lived this with me, is they tell us they're going to give us guidance in May, and then we get it, no, don't worry, it's going to come in June, and then it came in July, right? And okay, we're going to give you an update for metrics in September, and then we got something in October. So it's frustrating. I don't foresee, with everything happening at the state level right now, that they're going to get on their game and start giving us weekly updates to guidance. But having those advisory committees is going to be helpful, so that when new guidance comes in, we immediately have a team to review at every level.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Abby?
I was wondering if any thought had gone to clubs if school does reopen soon. I understand this is a more minor subject, but I feel that a lot of students like that aspect of high school and are a little limited right now, but I do realize that it is an area that would require more precaution.
Yeah, the only thing I disagree with is that it's a minor issue. So I gotta tell you, I think that the club issue is huge, and it's for exactly the reason you said it, that students like that part of high school, like that part of school, and I think because of that, it's a perfect connection back to that social emotional learning for kids, right? And we know that there are students who may not love everything academic about school, but really have a hook in one of those clubs or one of those athletic teams, and that's what keeps them going, and I think that's great. So yeah, the answer right now is that we don't foresee, to be fair and honest, our late buses being able to get back online this year. But we've been starting to work with our clubs around moving back in person. So for example, our robotics club at the middle school is back to meeting in person. So they put together a plan, it was approved. We have a drama event getting back in person here at the high school. So there are club advisors who are working with, they work a lot with Barb Gregory to submit their plan in terms of what it would look like and work with their building principal. If we have kids back 5 days a week, that's something that we're very much focused on, as long as students would be able, it couldn't be everybody because we wouldn't be able to offer late buses, but we would be able to work with students who can get picked up and probably be working after school. As long as those safety precautions are in place, they'd be the same for a club.
All right, thank you.
I truly miss mock trial. That is my go-to. Just so you know, that's my Super Bowl, is going to see the mock trial finals, and been a little disappointed this year.
Yeah.
Okay. Catherine?
Tom, about the buses, you're saying that they would be more full than they are, and because of the warmer weather, we most likely can utilize and take advantage of that and keep, because we'd have to keep the windows open. So we're shooting for April 19th, and that really is probably beyond the ice and the wind and the cold. But what about the rain?
So I can tell you that, and I'll name names, is HFL has had more kids on their bus all year, and they've kept windows open all year.
Okay.
All winter. And the CDC guideline is great because they talk about any airflow is better than none. So cracking the window works.
Okay.
So on those days where it's raining, and again, these are things we're still finalizing, but haven't finalized. But it would, really looking at the CDC guidance, it would be cracking the windows on the buses. So in a rainstorm, they'd still be open, but they wouldn't be open all the way.
Yeah, because
Does that make sense?
Yes, of course. And my vision was that that the recommendation was that they were wide open.
Yep.
So, but that's not what's necessary. Okay.
Yep.
All right,
So
thank
the
you.
more airflow you have, the better. Same with our classrooms. So when we have more kids in them, being able to keep the windows open, they don't have to be all the way open, but anything is better than nothing. And it goes back to, just as a note, as our air exchange. We still have our air exchange on, so we're bringing in as much outside air as we can without impacting our ability to heat, and as much outside air in as possible as the temperature shifts, to continue to air condition the space in the buildings that have air conditioning. But we'll be able to, we're still bringing in more fresh air than ever. We've got our filtration system working at capacity to make sure we're exchanging that air per fits both the New York State Department of Health guidance and also the CDC guidance.
Okay, thank you.
So Tom, I had any other questions from the board? No, okay. I had a couple questions, and I'm just trying to check off the ones that we had. So we talked about the submission of the reopening plan to the New York Department of Health. Let's say based on whatever you may have in no past experience. Whatever,
Sure.
Do you know what the timing will be, and do they have to explicitly approve, or is there like a clock that once it runs out, it's an implied approval?
Those are great questions, so I'm going to be very honest. We submit the plan in July. We got an email that said, "Thank you for submitting your plan," and that was the last we heard. All districts in the state. So the conversation then was, what you have to do, which we did, and we'll do again, is you have to put your reopening plan on your webpage. You have to communicate it out to the community, which we did, it's still up there, and communicate it out, and as long as you're abiding by all that guidance. We do know districts got it kicked back if their guidance, if their plan did not fit the guidance. So I guess that's a non-answer, but there is no timeline. The state never gives you an easy timeline, but I don't know of anybody, including us, who got an approval. We just didn't get a denial of our plan.
So it was an implicit approval. essentially.
Implicit approval, yeah, implicit approval.
Okay.
Sounds good. It's a frustrating to no end, but it doesn't really shock me coming out of the state this year.
And so again, I think that kind of answers the question. If we look at this, if we have to resubmit it, and we look at as it, if there's some period of time elapses, it's an implicit approval. That's one thing. Now, if they kick it back, then clearly we have to address what they have.
Yeah, if the state pushes back, let's say nothing changes with the Department of Health, we submit a reopening plan based on CDC, and the state says no or pushes back, we are in a spot where opening then would be going against the New York State Department of Education and the New York State Department of Health. There are ramifications for any school district that says, thank you, but we're going to do it anyway.
Do they define what those are?
That would be, I would imagine state aid is coming into play, and if I am actively working against the New York State government, then I think certifications are probably going to be up in question. So that's the reality of it. I couldn't tell the board or the community that New York State pushed back and said no, and we're still going to do something. Because what we're saying is we're going to follow the CDC guidance, we're going to follow safety. If the state is pushing back, then obviously if that happens, I'm going to assume that it's something that doesn't fit the safety and lens of our plan, and that would worry me. We do have staff lives and student lives and community lives, and we want to make sure we're doing everything safe and by the book. But I'm willing at this point to say we're not going to wait anymore for DOH. We're going to keep moving forward with planning using the CDC guidance. Really hopeful that is where the shift is going to come. Because that is what's happening across the country. People are adopting the CDC guidelines. Massachusetts is opening back with 3 feet because of their science and their data and their research, and the CDC was the icing on the cake. California did it, and I think when we look at where New York aligns itself, I'd be surprised if they didn't follow suit.
And as far as the advisory committee goes, have you thought about how long they need to stay in place, or if there's what's the condition in which we no longer need them in place?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think we don't have a timeline for when we would say no more advisory committees, but at least it would be through the opening of September. And then I would imagine, we'll have to take it, I would imagine we're not going to meet with the advisory committees on a regular basis once we're back 5 days a week and running. But if there were new guidance that came out that would shift something, that's when we'd bring our advisory committees back in. And that's aligned with what other districts are doing as well.
So we keep them in place, but meet on an as-needed basis?
Meet as an as-needed basis, yeah.
Okay. All right, that was what I had. Again, board, any other questions? All right, thank you.
The last thing, and just closing before I turn over to Dr. Driffill, is the biggest piece I think that's critical for the community to understand, and the board and our staff and our students, is the reason we're continuing to push for a potential reopening and hopeful that it happens. I haven't changed my viewpoint from last March. We're going to use the science and the data to dictate what we're doing, right? I don't use Facebook. I'm kind of making a joke, but I don't use what Facebook tells me, and I don't use what frustrated people on the news tell me. I get it. I'm with you. I want my own kids back 5 days a week. We all want to be back 5 days a week, but we have to follow the science and the data. And I know we can argue about what does that mean and let's just do it. But at the end of the day, we are a local government working under the umbrella of the New York State government. We have to follow some things even when we don't fully agree with them. Now is so different because the CDC, Dr. Fauci supports it. Dr. Mendoza has supported it publicly that he does agree with the CDC guidance. He doesn't have the ability as a local Monroe County Department of Health person to make it happen for everybody, but he can understand the science behind it. He supports it. The people on the CDC, they dictate so much of what happens, but we don't report to the CDC, we report to New York State Department of Health. But I think it's really important as we continue to go through here is, this isn't, I always feel pressure, but I don't feel like, oh, I have to find a plan to open just because. We're doing it because the science and the data says we can do it through the CDC lens and keep students and staff in the community safe, right? And that's what's critically important. Our vaccination rate for school staff, I have to report that to the Department of Health every Friday. It's anonymous, but our percentage of staff fully vaccinated means they've gotten either the Johnson & Johnson single dose or the Moderna Pfizer double dose.
Yeah.
Is growing every week. This Friday will be the second week I have to submit it, but it's already higher percentage-wise than it was last Friday when I put it in. So we see that happening. So you put in the fact that, what's really changed, the vaccination rates in our district, staff-wise, are increasing fast. We're continuing to do random quick tests in schools, which are continuing to show a 0 or a 0.4 infection rate, really low infection rates in our school. We've got the CDC scientists in the nation saying we can do this at 3 feet, and we've got the fact that we've got 10 weeks left of school. If we're going to trial something, let's do it now with 10 weeks left and help kids bridge that gap for September.
Right.
If we have to wait until September, we'll have our students will be out of school, traditional school, for a year and a half. And so I think when we talk about that stress and anxiety of coming back to school, let's do this. And I know that kids are there too. The weather's getting nicer. Windows can stay open. We can do more outside time. The classes can go outside for breaks, for mass breaks, and even to read books and do things outside. That's much different than January in upstate New York. So all these things are in our favor, but at the end of the day, the entire push is going to be around what's best for students and what we can do safely based on science and data. The only difference is I can't rely on the New York State Department of Health anymore to update their guidance, so we're going to keep planning and preparing with the CDC guidance and are hopeful that New York State Department of Health will come on board. If they don't before the second week in April, then we're going to have a conversation about resubmitting our plan to the state and seeing where we're going to go.
Thank you.
No problem. I thought that was going to be short. I'm so sorry.
That's
But I'll turn it over to Dr. Driffill now for budget updates.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Putnam. So now we can turn it over to a very exhilarating topic, budget development for the 21-22 school year. So just to keep the board and community apprised, tonight we have a few quick updates around projected expenditures, some new information and inferences around some of our incoming revenues, the budget process ahead, and then just a quick capital project note as we wrap up. So where are we in the budget development process? We're continuing to refine our revenue projections. We're looking at appropriations analysis as we build toward a proposed budget for adoption on April 20th. We've had a full first draft budget, second draft budget in accordance with our budget development calendar. We have another update tonight. Starting in early April, we start our legal requirement process around the legal notices that the board has already adopted, getting those circulated in our papers of record, getting all of the budget disclosures disseminated in our buildings and on our websites before we finally get to the budget hearing and vote come May. So just a few quick expenditure note updates. We did receive new information since our last meeting for final costs for cross-contract BOCES services for out-of-district BOCES services that we rely on that Monroe does not offer. So these were for Albany, Genesee Valley, and Wayne Finger Lakes BOCES. We had already seen final costs for Erie 1 BOCES in Buffalo and Onondaga, Cayuga BOCES out in Syracuse. We're continuing to monitor our registrations very closely, encouraging families, particularly at the kindergarten, first grade level, to get in touch with the registrar, get all the paperwork set up. I spoke to the registrar today. She is actually encouraged with the level of engagement that she's seen thus far. She estimates that the known population of kiddos that we have out there, that we already have 80 to 90% registered, and it only being March, so that's very encouraging. And then, as always, we're monitoring staffing updates as we have retirements and resignations and internal shuffling. So where are we tonight for next year's budget development? The bottom line number is that we're still a little over $104 million, so 104, 55,000, 150. That represents a year-over-year budget increase of $1.439 million, or 1.4%. You can see the functional areas broken out. General support, what we typically classify as more administrative functions, everything related to oversight and supervision, operations and maintenance, just down a little bit, but basically even year over year. You can see that instruction up $1.1 million, making up the vast majority of our $1.4 million increase. That functional area represents $55 million of next year's $104 million budget, a 2% increase year over year. Transportation, basically flat as is. That's due, if you recall, our conversations about BOCES transportation declining year over year based on our ability to offer wheelchair services in district, and because BOCES, like us, has a bit of a driver shortage right now, and they just can't offer all the supplemental runs that we've relied on them for in the past. And then undistributed costs makes up our debt service, interfund transfers, and employee benefits, seeing just a 1% increase in those areas in years past where that was 5, 6, 7, 8%. So relatively good news on the budget side of things. Another way of looking at our spending is through the object. So not a lot of change year over year, not a lot of change since our last update. Salaries and personnel benefits still represent about 3/4 of our budget. Debt service next year, 6%. Equipment and supplies, just 2% of the budget. Our BOCES costs, if you recall our conversation last time, are up a bit this year as we continue to rely on those services to leverage the aid that we get from the state. Contractual services, 7%, and then those interfund transfers, those transfers to the special aid fund for extended school year services over the summer, school lunch fund, and any transfers to the capital fund there. So I want to spend a little bit more time tonight talking about revenue updates. So last week, the State Assembly and Senate passed their one-house budgets. So these are the official response to the governor's executive proposal that he had released back in January. They're not binding, they're just the starting point. In some years, they're more aspirational. They can be political documents. But as I'll discuss in a moment, both houses had very positive developments for where we sit relative to education. I did want to just address the American Rescue Plan that passed Congress and was signed by President Biden. I've seen various allotments that Penfield is supposed to get on Twitter and the answer is we don't know exactly what the American Rescue Plan is going to provide for us in terms of dollar resources. There's been some conjecture and hearsay about whether or not there'll be associated requirements with those dollars. I've seen that 10% or 20% will have to be dedicated solely to intervention services as we scaffold support around kiddos, as Dr. Putnam said, that have been out of a traditional schooling environment for the last almost year and a half. So much more to come on that, but I just wanted to publicly comment for the board and for the community at large that we don't have official data on what that's going to look like yet. So let me jump over to kind of breaking down these one-house budgets. So these were both released not this Sunday, but last Sunday night. They touched on a whole multitude of issues across the entire state budget, but I just want to dial in on some of the ramifications for education. So first and foremost was foundation aid for next year. If you recall from our conversations in evaluating the governor's proposal, he had proposed keeping foundation aid flat for what would have been a third straight year. Foundation aid by far is our greatest pot of state aid. It's the general aid category that's not for a specific purpose. It's not generated from a prior year expense driven reimbursement. It's just a pool of money that we get to use as a school district in accordance with the state's constitutional requirement to provide a free and basic education. The foundation aid formula is something that I'll touch on in a moment, but I know the board's aware, but sometimes the community might not know this, is this formula went into effect 12 years ago, 13 years ago, and right away there was political turmoil in Albany, and then we had the Great Recession, and it was never actually fully implemented relative to the legislation that still remains on the books today. So really positive development is that both of these houses said not only are they going to increase foundation aid $1.4 billion year over year, they are going to commit to a 3-year phase-in of the foundation aid formula, and I'll touch upon that in a moment. The various politicians in the state have said that they've welcomed this, that they would be a champion for it, but the political forces have never aligned where it was really a possibility in the last couple of years. So now with the supermajority in the state legislature, there's at least some chatter that this could actually become a real possibility here in the next 10 days. The other really good news that came out of both of these one-house budgets was that the services aid, that proposal that the governor had that would consolidate 9 different aid categories, mostly transportation and BOCES as the biggest impact for us, into one block that would be limited to some growth factor moving forward in the future. It was never clear exactly what that would look like, but it was resoundingly rejected by both the Assembly and Senate, so it seems like there's no momentum there. Even the governor's budget director, Robert Mujica, on a conference call yesterday noted that given the state's new influx of resources with federal dollars and the improving budget situation, that they would not necessarily need to seek any aid cuts. So it seems like all 3 branches, all 3 are aligned on that. The federal aid use. So if you recall back in the governor's proposal, he had said that he was going to take those CRSA funds, the Coronavirus Relief and Supplemental Appropriations Act that was passed at the end of December, and essentially say, thank you, Washington, we are going to hold on to that, and that will make us whole in terms of education aid. It was a direct violation to the federal dollar rules that we have to abide by. And the good news is that the Assembly and Senate have said that any federal dollars, so the CRSA legislation that was passed in late December, and now the American Rescue Plan, which neither of these one-house budgets touched on because it was so recent, will be supplemental dollars to Penfield, above and beyond state education aid. Again, we don't know exactly how much that's going to be. We don't know the rules around it. Typically with federal money, you have to put in an application, and it has to adhere to some spending standards. It sounds like we might not have to necessarily spend it all next year, that there might be a 2 or 3 year window to utilize those funds. But as more information comes to light on that, we'll be bringing that back to the board. And then the 2 houses of the state legislature both propose to increase unassigned fund balance. So I know the board's familiar with this, but for the community as a whole, the unassigned fund balance is our true rainy day fund. It is statutorily limited to 4% of the following year's budget. So in our case, it's a little over $4 million. I always make the analogy that our emergency fund is about 2 weeks worth of expenses for Penfield Central. And in our personal finance lives, we're always told to have, 3 to 6 month emergency fund. So it's discordant with some of the, financial tenets that we have been taught. So over the years, this has been lobbied as too small of a difference, but essentially the comptroller and even politicians that I've spoken to over the years have said it's never going to happen. It would be too politically difficult to get across the finish line. So the Assembly this year has said that they're open to increasing it to 6%, up from that 4%, just for a period of 3 years, as districts make their way out of this pandemic situation. And the Senate said they would double it to 8% for a period of 5 years. So we'll see what actually happens in the course of the next 10 days with the budget negotiations in Albany. But I think that's a positive lever. It gives us a little bit of flexibility in our future budget planning. So I do want to just touch on foundation aid again. I know the board has seen this, but just because this is a public document, the community does watch these presentations, they should be aware of it. So that foundation aid history that I touched on went into effect, like I said, about 13 years ago. So in that first year, the middle column was the foundation aid due to the district relative to the formula, and then the left column is what we actually received. And then the final column on the right is how much we were, quote unquote, shorted on an annual basis. So over the course of that time period, you can see that we are shorted $70 million relative to the foundation aid formula that the state recognizes. That's on the books. It's in all of our accounting output reports that we receive from the state. So just a staggering sum. I want to go back to the point where they said that they were both proposing a 3-year phase-in of foundation aid. So if we're currently short just shy of $9 million, there is at least a mathematical inference to say, okay, $9 million over 3 years, average of $3 million a year. It is written that foundation aid would go up at least 2%. So we know relative to the 13.6 that the governor had proposed as a flat amount for 3 years straight, we'd get a couple $100,000 there. But we don't know exactly what this is going to look like until the state actually presents a budget, hopefully by April 1st. We'll talk about that a little more in a second. So current revenue projections relative to the spending that we talked about before, levy, pilot, the STAR program, and fees. Our levy tax cap this year was 1.97%. We've committed to stay certainly within that cap. And pilot increased about $20,000 or so. That's why it shows the 1.99%. New York State aid, as it is, as a standalone, this is where we are relative to the governor's forecast. It kicks up a little bit because of increased BOCES aid. But if we receive more state aid than we, it looks like we may, certainly not yet determined, we might be able to take a look here at adjusting our local levy. So in the course of the next 10 days, we'll obviously have a better picture, but the next time we come back to the board for a budget adoption come April, we might be able to adjust some of these revenue projections before bringing that to the community as a whole come May. I haven't changed the county sales tax projections year over year. I don't expect county sales tax to increase 10%, but last year, based on the drastic situation that was happening in the spring, we had decreased our budget quite a bit there. So I think this will get back to where we've historically been. All other revenue is relatively flat, down about $60,000. This is primarily due to ambiguity around admissions revenue, driver's ed, supplemental revenue, health services, things that we have, which will be dependent on what happens here in the COVID environment. And then assigned fund balance, that's the last piece of balancing the budget that we look at on an annual basis, so we don't know exactly what that'll be for next year. We as a district have always committed about that $2 million mark. And then in interfund transfers, $390,000 from the debt service fund to help offset some of our debt service costs in accordance with our debt service plan. So where are we altogether for next school year? So you can see in the furthest right column, March 23rd, we have those appropriations a little over $104 million and estimated revenues right now a little over $103 million, bringing us to a current shortfall of just a hair over $1 million. And that is without appropriating any of that fund balance. And that is obviously still dependent on what happens with state aid. So we'll see what happens. You can see trending throughout the course of the spring. That gap has gotten smaller as we've worked as a district to kind of flesh out the reality for next year. So typically this time of year, we'd like to take a look at local info relative to the levy and try to put together some projections for tax rates, so that the board is making an informed decision when it comes to adopting the budget, and the community is well aware of the rates for next year. So we do not have assessment data yet for our 6 towns, but we can see publicly on the Department of Tax and Finance website what the towns are indicating is a very preliminary, very tentative, very subject to change level of assessment. So just as a quick primer, I know the board's aware, but for the community, equalization rate is the stated difference between market value and assessed value of your home. So for instance, in Brighton, over the last 3 years, they've been at 100% equalization rate. The assessed value of those homes are theoretically equal to market value. There is a little bit of wiggle room when it comes to assessments and how that actually works, but that's the basic premise. So in the spring, when the town assessors rather are going through their process, they have to submit to the state a tentative level of assessment where they believe their assessments will come back. The state does not necessarily have to adopt those as the actual official equalization rates, which isn't done until July, but it can be a leading indicator. So what I want to bring the board's attention to is that by and large, it looks like most of our levels of assessment are dropping a little bit. So when that happens, usually tax rates go up to kind of artificially capture the levy for the perceived market value of that home. And that's not, it's not a real surprise. In the last couple of years, we've seen housing values really go through the roof. Assessments just can't really keep up, particularly with the pandemic going on. So just wanted the board to be aware of that. And then just as a refresher, we adopt the levy. So we set the actual dollar amount relative to the tax cap that we submit back in February of how many local dollars we'll receive as a district. But we do not set the actual tax rates. We adopt the tax rates by way of what the assessments come out as for those specific towns, and then what the state equalization rates are the judged perception of how accurate those assessments are. So this has always been a useful example. The slide deck's available on the website under budget, so the community can come and kind of take a look. I know it's small, but essentially you have 2 towns that make up your school district. For us, our 2 biggest towns are Penfield and Brighton. You have 2 equal market value homes, $250,000. One of those homes in one of the towns is assessed at $250,000. One's assessed at $185,000. So the equalization there is a 74%, indicating that there is a 26% below value. So the town tax rate in the town where the assessment is lower is higher. So this is a system built for equality, particularly in a district like Penfield, where we have multiple towns, we have multiple counties, both of which share sales tax, which also factors into this a little bit, so not to go further down a rabbit hole, but hopefully that's a useful metric in determining that, while the board sets the levy, we don't actually derive the rate ourselves. And then just being mindful of tax rate, one of our organizational tenets in our strategic plan is fiscal responsibility. So tax rate is a metric of that. And you can see generally in the last dozen years or so, we've done a good job of keeping things stable. And then just as another benchmark to the county, so this is Monroe 1 and Monroe 2 schools, just showing where our true value tax rate lies in comparison to others. We don't necessarily look to the left or look to the right, but it is a useful metric and just kind of letting know where we stand. So, next steps for the budget. April 1st, will there be a state budget known? Hopefully. So I saw that the Assembly Leader Carl Hasty was diagnosed with COVID this afternoon. He's going to be working from home over the course of the next 10 days in accordance with quarantine rules, isolation rules. So I don't think that'll affect negotiations, but he's a central player in that process. So it's at least something to be aware of. By April 3rd, as I mentioned earlier, we do need to post that budget notice that the board has already adopted relative to our May propositions and time and dates and location. On April 20th, the board adopts the proposed 2021-22 school budget and property tax report card. April 27th, the full budget document is disseminated on the website and the buildings as a whole. So as a reminder, that has things like our academic performance over the years. It includes the property tax report card. There's salary disclosures. It's a very comprehensive document. It's usually more than 100 pages. April 27th, we have our Meet the Candidates session. On May 4th, we have our budget hearing. And on May 18th, the third Tuesday of May, is the statewide vote and board election. As a reminder, for that May 18th ballot, we have 5 propositions. One is the school operating budget. Appropriations continue. We have assured the community that we'll be levy compliant, which means that we need 50% approval. Board adopts that budget come April 20th. We have a land purchase proposition to the community. So we have contracted with the owner of property at the corner of Jackson and Plank. It's 40 acres. It'll cost a little over $800,000. This is paid from an existing capital reserve, our 2016 capital reserve. So there's no new dollars associated with this referendum. It's just money that we've allocated in savings over the years. The third is bus purchases from our capital reserve for buses. So this year, in accordance with our bus replacement schedule, we are looking to purchase 7 large buses. The total cost, inclusive of trade-ins, of $870,000, of which $390,000 is required from an authorization from our capital reserve. We are proposing a new 2021 capital reserve for buildings. We have 2 capital reserves, a 2014 and a 2016 reserve that are fully funded. So we need to create a new reserve to save for our next capital project work. That is always coming. That new reserve authorization is for 10 years or $25 million in aggregate, whichever happens first. And then the 5th is our Board of Education trustee election. So, a lot of information. Questions, clarifications, comments, or concerns relative to where we stand with the budget development process?
Thank you, Dr. Driffill. Any questions from the board? Lisa.
I just wanted to clarify, the bus authorization, why are we doing that? If it's already in the capital, I'm confused, I think.
Sure. So I think there's 2 questions in there. So it's an $870,000 purchase. In our operating budget, school budget, we've allocated a $480,000 interfund transfer that was included in the current year budget, which goes towards that purchase. So then above and beyond that, we need authorization from the community to withdraw $390,000 from the capital reserve. Anytime we want to reserve money from a capital reserve, we need voter approval to do that. Does that make sense?
It does. I think I'm getting confused because we just changed something a few years ago about bus reserve and general fund, and you guys know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
We can clarify another time. I think I'm
Sure.
just.
I think what you're thinking about is at one point we had changed a different strategy of what we wanted to have for reserve for buses.
We used to have a bus reserve
Right.
something. So if we had a bus reserve, we wouldn't have to do this, right?
No, this is from the capital reserve for buses. So we do have a bus
So
reserve.
we do have a bus reserve?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, it's strictly just for bus purchases. But it works like a normal capital reserve for buildings.
So
So
we
when
still
we
have to,
go
like,
for
vote on
community
it. I
approval
see.
to use
Okay.
capital reserve, we need the voter approval to do that.
Yep.
Gotcha. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Other board members? Okay, I have a couple questions. Early on, you mentioned the BOCES. You're looking at rates from, you listed 3 BOCES and you mentioned several others. Can you explain why we're doing things with so many different BOCES?
Yes, I can. So it's a great question. So Monroe 1 and Monroe 2 BOCES are fantastic. They're great local partners. But even the largest BOCES in the state are confined to the scope of services that they can provide. So the way the BOCES rules work is that if a different BOCES across the state, different RIC offers a service that our local BOCES does not, if there is a competitive service or an equal service in our local BOCES, we need to go through them. So we have a cross-contract agreement that Dr. Putnam needs to sign and the district superintendent Dan White needs to sign that basically says, yes, Penfield, we recognize that Quest, our BOCES in the capital region, provides this service that we do not. still generates the same aid, still the same rules. It's just essentially we call somebody else when we have support issues. So that's how it works. It's just a matter of resources available at that BOCES.
All right, thank you. The other question is, or really more, if you can just elaborate on this. You mentioned that the 2014 and 2016 capital reserve are fully funded, and we're looking at a new capital reserve. So can you explain what the status of those two previous capital reserves are?
Yeah, absolutely. So the way that the capital reserves work is that when we go to the community, we say, we seek this authorization to put away this much money over this period of time or this amount of dollars. So the new capital reserve, the authorization is 10 years or $25 million. Let's say in 5 years, we reach full funding on that reserve. We put $25 million into it. We would not be able to put any more dollars into it. So the 14 and 16 reserves have been fully funded as of last fiscal year, June 30th, and they are both earmarked for the hopeful proposition that we put to the community this fall for the new bus garage and buildings and ground facility. So there is about $20 million between those two. So those dollars will go towards the next project.
Right. So we planned ahead, we've got a purpose for that money, and now we're getting a new account for future plans.
You got it.
Thank you. All right. And once again, that was all I had. Board members,
I have another
Lisa?
question, sorry. Have we heard anything about the vote? Like, are there any requirements about absentee or any of that we know?
I haven't heard anything overly onerous, like relative to last year's requirements. There's been some discussion amongst the clerks and business officials and superintendents that there might be, like there was for the November votes, the political votes, that COVID might be an acceptable reason for absentee ballots. But we haven't heard anything around sending absentee ballots to everyone, having the pre-postage paid like we did last year. We haven't seen anything.
Not to cut you off, but I think, because I had a quick conversation, I don't know if I can turn to my phone a friend of our board clerk, Sharon Erkfitz. Was there an update from the state on that you know of, or was it from?
It was from Monroe County School Board, but the legislators that had said that we can run the vote as usual. For the absentee ballot applications, we're still allowed to use COVID as an exemption for coming to vote in person. But the people would still have to fill out an application for the absentee ballot. And we don't have to send out anything like last year. So
Sorry.
I think
It sounds like a win-win.
I think we're all good.
Yeah.
So still, and I will say, what goes along with that is Sharon Erkfitz, as the board clerk who oversees the votes, has already been working and reaching out to the electors that work the election for us and is building on that and preparing, so.
Thank you.
Barb?
I did see that there is a conflict with a religious holiday and the 18th. So the school districts could petition, I believe it's state ed, to have that vote changed, and I believe that it was moved to the 11th, so the week before. Because there were certain school districts downstate that adhered to this religious holiday. So there are, I think, 5 or 6 school districts, but that,
Is it district by district?
yes.
Okay,
Yeah, you would have to apply for that,
okay.
I think by March 31st.
Yes. So that's the only thing I saw that was pertinent to the vote. Otherwise, it's going to be the 18th.
Yep. Thanks, Barb.
All right.
And then just a quick project note. Actually, two kind of operational things. One, scheduled for approval tonight is that district-wide safety plan. The amendment that we had to that, we presented back, I think it was February 2nd, which incorporated the changes relative to the communicable disease, continuity of operations. And then additionally, we have some change orders for approval from the board. The one I wanted to note was the Bay Trail boiler replacements that we are able to fit into the budget. As a reminder, these were originally bid back in October of 2019. The contractors have agreed to honor the pricing. So because we have the budget and this was going to go into the next capital project, the fact that we're able to do it now in budget, no worries about timeline. It doesn't disrupt our ability to have the project substantially completed by the end of summer. We're recommending for the board to take action on that approval. And that is it for me.
Thank you.
So we've got, wrapping up our superintendent reports this evening is Mr. Peiffer, who's going to give us an update on New York State assessments in the world of COVID.
My clicker doesn't want me to.
Oh, here, this one works, I think.
It decided it was not an indictment on Dan's presentation that the clicker fell asleep, I promise. All right, thank you, Dr. Putnam. So, you know, in this kind of ever-changing world that we're living in with the COVID environment and the pandemic and our shifting educational programming, we are now coming to the time of year for the annual New York State assessments in grades 3 through 8, and then shortly on the heels of that are the New York State Regents exams at the end of June. So we think it's important to update the public on what we know about the status of those exams and the board with regards to that as well. I think the first note is important is that we often talk about these requirements as they come from New York State, but the reality is that's a hand-me-down from the federal government. The 3 through 8 and certain Regents assessments are a requirement of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act and the latest iteration of that ESSA, the Every Student Succeeds Act. I think everyone was hopeful during the presidential campaign, based on things that were said, that all these assessments would be canceled as they were last year during the pandemic, but that has not played out. In fact, with the new education secretary taking office, he blatantly said that there would not be issuances of blanket waivers from the assessment requirements under ESSA. There is a window of hope there, though, in that while they won't be giving blanket waivers, they didn't say anything about individual state requests for waivers. So New York State and the State Education Department have applied for a waiver to be exempt from the assessment requirements under ESSA, but that has not yet been replied to. Our understanding is that it's up to 120 days from the date of submission that the feds have to reply to that, and under emergency situations it can be as soon as 90 days. We don't know which of those timetables are going to be held to. It is interesting to note that if it's 120 days, that would technically put us after the 3 through 8 ELA assessments. If they respond within 90 days, we would know before those assessments, but we're not sure when we're going to hear back from that. So, in absence of that reply, we in the state and all districts are required to continue to move forward with plans to administer the state assessments in 3 through 8, ELA, math, and science, as well as the required Regents exams. In the event that waiver does get approved, from that point forward, any of those required assessments would be canceled by New York State. We're just waiting on that. So we will see what happens. As we continue to get information, we will continue to put it on our website. Everything I'm sharing with you this evening is available on our website under the instruction tab and going down to assessment information. So specifically to the 3 through 8 assessments, we are only required to administer the assessments to in-person students. We are not required, and we really don't have a method to statewide to administer the 3 through 8 assessments to our students who are part of 100% virtual programs, because it requires a lot of security on the devices that are used, going through certain browsers. There's a lot of pieces of information that had to be specifically put on the machines and done in-house, and we can't do that unless those machines are here. So those students who are part of our 100% virtual programs will not have to take the tests. It is important to note that they can if they so choose. If their families are interested in having them take those assessments, they should contact their school's administrator or their program administrator, and they will be given an opportunity to come into school and take those assessments should they so desire. In further response to the pandemic situation, New York State is shortening the assessments significantly this year. In the past, we've heard that, and we know that it's been 1 or 2 questions here or there. This year, we will only be required to administer part 1 of the assessments, which is the multiple choice section for the ELA tests and the math tests, and the written portion for the 4th grade and 8th grade science test. That can typically take 50 to 90 minutes depending on grade level for that administration. So it'll be a 1-day administration. Those dates are going to be determined in the coming weeks, and they'll be posted on the website, and we'll notify parents as well. So much shorter time for these assessments. Also, we have been told that part of that shortening will mean that there will be no field test questions embedded in those portions of the test, which is good news too, because sometimes those can be tricky. And again, I already mentioned about the science tests. Similarly, for our Regents exams, again, only students who are part of our in-person or hybrid programs would be administered the assessments in Regents. They are limiting the number of the Regents that are required to those that are required under ESSA. Under ESSA, we have to give an ELA exam, we have to give an algebra exam, and then we have to give a science exam. But because of our advanced placement work, because we offer, and many schools offer, 1 of 2 science assessments as their first science Regents exam, either earth science or living environment, they're giving both. So we have to administer both of those assessments to our students. Again, 100% virtual students do not have to take those exams. They wouldn't have to sit for them. If their families and they decide they want to take them, then they should contact their administrator either at Bay Trail or at the high school to try to make arrangements to be able to do that. And again, there will be an exemption from the graduation requirement for passing these exams again this year. So last year, we didn't administer the exams, and the kids who would have needed to pass those exams to graduate were given an exemption. Even if they take the take the exam this year, they have an exemption from passing in order to graduate. And similarly, a lot of the accommodations that were put in place for special education students are being carried into this year as well. We've got a frequently asked question document in that regard to help guide us in that work, and we'll be working through that with the high school to make sure we put all those measurements in place and inform folks of that. There may also be questions about opt-outs. Going back to the 3 through 8 assessments, we will be communicating with parents the steps to take should they choose to, if they do not want their child to take it, even though they're an in-person student. We'll let parents know how to let us know about that. We're going to do it a little bit differently this year. We're going to use an IC survey that'll be coming from each building's principal for parents to fill out, as opposed to collecting emails and letters to the administrators for that regard. Some families at the secondary level may be thinking about opt-outs or questioning opt-outs. Right now, it is very unclear. In the past, with Regents exams, because they've been a graduation requirement, you really can't opt out if you want to graduate. This year, the state has been very vague on what that means. It's just an interesting dynamic that we're looking for more information for. What we do know is there aren't makeups really for the Regents exams. In typical years, if you miss your Regents exam in algebra, you have to wait until summer school or January or the next year in June to make up that assessment. So this year, if a student doesn't sit for the exam, they would most likely be given the exemption, but they wouldn't have that exam score. Another key piece with Regents exams is with regards to the diploma designations. We'll be able to use course grades to help determine things like advanced designation or mastery or things of that nature that are typically where they typically use the assessment score in that regard. So there's a lot of information there. We're still working our way through it, as are most districts in the county. We as ASIs were just meeting about it and spent a couple of hours on it last week, and as more information becomes available, it'll be communicated out either through my office or through the buildings, because some of it's very particular to either the high school or the middle school. Can I answer any questions?
Questions for Mr. Peiffer? Jim?
Bill,
sorry.
Jim,
It's late.
It's particularly to the 3-8 assessments, but in these are assessments. Is there any indication from the state what this data is going to be used for? It seems to me, between only having a certain amount of kids even be able to take it, that the data is not going to be reliable. And if it is reliable, or if it's remotely reliable, is there any way we get that information turned around back in time where we can make some formative assessments about the kids where our kids are?
I'm usually one of the first to question New York State's motives with regards to certain things like this. I will tell you, they've been very forthright since really the beginning of this year about where they stood with administering these tests this year, and that was that they didn't want to.
Okay.
So I don't think you're going to hear them talk about the use or validity of this data. They're doing it because as of right now it's required by the federal government. And as you recall, when we talked about the federal grants, the way that the federal government gets control over the state right of education is by tying requirements to money.
Yeah.
And so, if we don't meet these requirements, then the state risks receiving funding, so they have to do as they're told, and therefore we have to do as we're told.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else? All right, thank you, Mr. Peiffer.
That concludes
Thank you.
superintendent reports.
All right. Which brings us to change orders. We're at section 5A of the agenda. You have the list of change orders in front of you, and I think Dr. Driffill mentioned one of them. So it's recommended that the change orders be approved as listed. So may I have a motion? Let me get to the page. A motion in this. Let me read this one part first. The above change orders have been reviewed by and are supported by architect Vic Tomaselli, project manager Gary Huffman, clerks of the works Alan McNiff, and assistant superintendent for business and finance Dr. Dan Driffill. So may I have a motion and a second that change orders as described above be approved?
So moved.
Second.
Any questions or comments? All those in favor? Any opposed? The motion passes. And now we go to the safety plan approval, which was mentioned earlier. Pursuant to the amendments made to Education Law 2801A, the Penfield Central School District held a public hearing on February 2nd, 2021 to update the 2021 district-wide safety plan to include protocols for continuity of operation in the event of a declared public health emergency involving a communicable disease. 30 days of required public comment have elapsed. To comply with the April 1st filing deadline with the New York State Commissioner of Education, the Board of Education must adopt the updated district-wide safety plan. So may I have a motion and a second that the 2020-2021 district-wide safety plan be approved as amended and presented on February 2nd, 2021.
So moved.
Second.
Any questions or comments? All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion passes. And we have policies for first read. Looks like we have 7312 instructional materials and 7320 alcohol, tobacco, drugs, and other substances for students. So would may someone on the policy committee like to comment on those?
This is where I usually get pointed at. So, real quick, the instructional materials, the one change is it was numbered as 7311.1. We're not really sure why, so we looked through, but we're just changing it to keep it in line with the rest of our policies. It's going to be 7312. It'll have a new number. It'll be 7312. And then the shift we made here is around that the board, a line around the board requires instructional materials that align with the district mission and vision and current standards, research and best practice in the subject area, reflect the district's commitment to culturally responsive teaching and learning, and provide opportunities for students to see experiences and perspectives that are the same or different from their own. And that really aligns with a lot of the work we have been doing and will continue to do around equity, diversity, and inclusion, and that all students should be able to have material in their classroom that they can reflect to and also reflect about if it's not from their own background. So that's the change for instructional materials. And then the 7320 is, we really added vaping. So that policy used to be alcohol, tobacco, drugs, and other substances, and we've added vaping throughout that policy. So anywhere that alcohol, tobacco, and drugs aren't allowed, vaping at school and at school events is also not allowed.
Any questions or comments on that? Okay, we have policies for second read and approval, which includes 7130 residency, 7223 weighted grading and academic ranking, and along with that is the 7223 regulation, grading, and rank. We're approving the first two.
So we've reviewed those, and there haven't been any comments to the board.
Thank you. So, with that, may I have a motion and a second that the above policies be approved as presented?
So moved.
Second.
Any questions or comments? All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. And we have, one second, this thing just, there we go. A policy for deletion, 7250 curriculum auditing courses.
So this has been in our practice that if we do look to delete a policy, we bring it to the board for review and approval. This policy has been on and really never used. It used to say that students could audit a class when you're sitting for the whole class and not getting a grade. We've actually never used this policy, and so this is part of our 5-year review. As we took a look at it, to have a policy that's not required and one that we haven't used, the board policy committee felt we could delete this. And I would just say, if we ever had a situation where a student really had an educational reason for auditing a class and not getting credit for it, we'd be very open to look at that and have that. We don't need a policy to allow that to happen.
Thank you. So with that, may I have a motion and a second that policy 7250 be deleted from the district quality manual and as submitted, effective immediately?
So second.
Any questions or comments? All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. And next is the draft Board of Education schedule of meetings. You have that list in front of you, and this is basically for review. I think we will approve it at the next meeting.
Correct.
And is this posted on the district site? Or?
This is, I don't think so, no, because this is really board,
This
making
is
sure
board
that these
meetings.
days work for the board.
Right. Okay. And then we have Meet the Candidates Night coming up, which will be held, it's going to be held virtually on Tuesday, April 27th at 7 p.m. And the live stream information will be posted when it's available. For the Monroe County School Board Association committee meetings, there was information exchange. Would someone like to speak to that?
I'll do it tonight. Can everybody hear me okay? All right, so the presentation on March 10th was about code of conduct in a virtual environment. The presenter was James Colt, the Director of Security for Monroe One BOCES. The presenter began the presentation noting the swift and unexpected transition to virtual learning last March, gave districts little time to prepare for behavioral issues that might arise in virtual environment. He discussed discipline during a pandemic must consider students as social, emotional, behavior, and mental health needs. Students' lives are impacted by the pandemic in unique ways, and an upsurge of behavioral health issues in both school and home settings have resulted. Increased screen time, applications, and anxiety mental health issues created the perfect storm for cyberbullying, which commonly takes the form of rumors and insults. It can be more harmful than in traditional environments because the online setting allows information to be very public and travel fast, as we all know. He stressed discipline should focus on teaching appropriate behaviors rather than be punishment-based. Thank you. Schools should consider strategies that promote positive school climate, address misconduct, and foster student safety. Examples included assessment of school climate, restorative practices, trauma-informed care, relationship and trust building, and teaching pro-social behaviors. He suggested 3 sets of policies. I won't get into it a lot, but the districts already have in place where slight modifications could better set expectations for students and parents in a virtual setting. The first is acceptable use policies. Policies should include that all students receiving remote instruction are subject to current district policies, including acceptable use of policies, and should include details on prohibited behaviors, in particular, not composing, transmitting, or receiving via the internet content that could be considered discriminatory, offensive, obscene, threatening, harassing, intimidating, or disruptive to other persons. Bullying and harassment policies, so online behaviors connected to school are subject to school interventions, and student safety must always be the primary concern. Students should be aware digital histories are recoverable. Maybe provide digital citizenship training to all students. That was one suggestion. And then academic integrity policies should reaffirm that work submitted in a virtual setting is their own and not plagiarized, and cheating are 2 main concerns in this area. And BOCES utilized a climate survey and committee to complete code of conduct updates.
Yep. Thank you.
I think that's all my notes.
That's really lovely. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean,
Will you
it's-
send us the policy stuff, please?
Yeah, oh yeah, I will.
But that's interesting, because I think other districts are having students, when they pick up their laptops, I know at least some of the older students fill out a digital citizenship, like they have to do a training before they...
Yeah, that's what, and it's not mandated to change any of these policies, it's just up to the districts.
No, but I
to-
just think, because we rolled
Right.
those out so quickly, you know, like, whereas other districts, they were already doing one-to-ones. It's just something to think about maybe for
Absolutely.
next school year when people pick up. They're just like those little online videos kinds of things. So, it's interesting. Thank you.
Yeah.
Didn't think about that. That's a good one.
Good point. And we also had the Health and Safety Committee. Would someone like to speak to that?
So I will speak to that one.
Emily?
So just Alan just spoke about the capital improvement projects and where they were. Jessica, is it Croppo or Cropo? The nurse, Croppo, thank you. She just let us know that they're monitoring all of the different schools and with the students, you know, and any COVID issues that come up. But then they're still following all the protocols. Joey Argento just spoke about inspections of the kitchens and how that is on hold. Then Alan talked about the lead water sampling and how they're waiting for clarification on that. And then he also talked about the security audit and how they are installing all of the outdated cameras and any additional locations that they want to add things to. And then security screens for classroom corridor doors. And that was pretty much it. It was really a fast meeting. So.
Thank you. Any questions or comments for that? Actually, I have a
Nothing more to
question,
add. Sure.
hopefully an easy one. Alan was waiting for clarification on lead testing. Do you know what that was?
Thank you. I will phone a
Dan
friend.
can take it.
Oh, there we go.
So, is this on? Can you hear me? So, if you recall, back in 2015, the state instituted lead testing requirements for all potable water sources. So in accordance with the 5-year schedule, it was supposed to be done again in 2020. With COVID and with the buildings being disrupted in the fall of 2020 based on foot traffic and water fountains being turned off, the state delayed that until June 30th of this upcoming year. Based on the current hybrid environments, there was a thought that that might get extended again. We did reach out to the State Department of Health. They notified us that there's no plans currently to extend that, so that we would need to engage. So we have a current BOCES bid with a vendor that thinks they could provide the service in the next couple months. The only caveat is that it's dependent upon when we do it. So if we have all of our kids back 5 days a week and we turn on all the water fountains, as Dr. Putnam mentioned before, great, that's good. If they can only do it, for instance, in the next 2 weeks, we still have things that are turned off, we would need to test those again when they eventually reopen. So we're really trying to hold off until things are totally opened up. And then, obviously, in accordance with the state law, those all get posted on the website. If there's any parts per billion above a certain standard, we need to remediate those. So we'll come back with an update on that, but it does look like we need to move forward with that required testing.
Okay, yes, and as you mentioned, that was such a big issue several years ago. I was kind of curious about
But as a
that.
reminder, we were a district that did the testing before it was
Before it became a
mandated.
big issue, yes.
Yes, we were.
That was Alan.
That is correct.
Yeah, that was Alan.
Yeah.
And Emily, I'm sorry, I should have let you answer that question, but Dan and I were just talking about that yesterday, so.
No, that was exactly what I was gonna say.
All right, perfect.
Those exact words.
Yes, those exact words.
Okay, there is no unfinished business. Is there any new business? No? And with that, make a motion and a second that the meeting be adjourned at 8:35 PM.
So moved.
Second.
Any questions or comments? All those in favor? Any opposed? All right, meeting adjourned.